The most valuable discoveries are made by those everyone underestimates. The sleek corporate executives never suspected that the limping veteran in scuffed boots would unearth a piece of American history worth millions, one that would bring their luxury development plans crashing down and change Eagle Valley forever. The conference room fell silent as the satellite images appeared on screen. The terrain analysis was unmistakable. Hidden beneath the abandoned Rimrock Ranch property lay a secret that had remained buried for nearly 6 decades. A fully equipped presidential emergency bunker, preserved like a Cold War time capsule. Carson Whitaker, the billionaire developer, stared in disbelief at the weathered veteran standing confidently before the town council. Just 2 months earlier, Whitaker had dismissed Michael Daniels as merely an obstacle to be brushed aside, a stubborn ex-soldier with an impractical dream. Now that same unassuming man had single-handedly halted a $200 million resort development and transformed the future of an entire community. It was a discovery that would soon attract national attention, government historians and museum curators from across the country. But more importantly to Mike Daniels, it was the key to fulfilling a promise he'd made to his late wife, to create a place of healing for those who had served their country only to return home broken and forgotten. This isn't just a story about finding a historical treasure. It's about seeing value where others see only wreckage, about honoring promises against impossible odds, and about the quiet strength of a man who refused to surrender his vision, even when the entire world told him he was fighting a losing battle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Who saw beyond the ruins? Michael Daniels winced as he stepped out of his 2008 Ford F-150, the old injury in his right leg, protesting after the 2-hour drive from Denver. The pain was a constant companion, a souvenir from his final deployment to Afghanistan when an improvised explosive device had torn through his convoy, taking 2 of his men and leaving him with a shattered femur and a collection of scars both visible and hidden. The morning fog still clung to the distant mountains as Mike surveyed the neglected expanse of Rimrock Ranch. To most observers, the property was a disaster. 400 acres of overgrown fields, collapsing outbuildings, and a main house whose roof had partially surrendered to the harsh Colorado winters. The real estate listing had diplomatically described it as a challenging opportunity requiring substantial investment, a euphemism that had kept the property on the market for nearly 5 years. But where others saw decay, Mike's trained eye detected opportunity. 22 years in the Army Corps of Engineers had taught him to look beyond surface appearances, to recognize solid foundations beneath cosmetic damage, to identify strategic potential in seemingly worthless terrain. "You sure about this, Mike?" Sam Reynolds asked, climbing out of the passenger side. Sam had served under Mike for 3 tours, and the bond forged in combat had brought him all the way from Idaho when Mike called about the property inspection. "This place looks like it would bankrupt you before you got the main house habitable." Mike smiled slightly, a rare expression on his weathered face. "Remember that forward operating base in Kandahar? Everyone said it couldn't be salvaged after the mortar attack." Sam chuckled. "And you had it operational in under a week." "Exactly," Mike replied, pulling a topographical map from his jacket pocket. "Most of the damage here is superficial. The bones are good." They moved toward what remained of the main house, Mike's limp more pronounced on the uneven ground. At 52, his body carried the evidence of a career spent in service, the slight curve in his posture from years of carrying heavy packs, the calluses on hands that had built structures in combat zones across 3 continents, the premature lines around eyes that had witnessed both humanity's capacity for destruction and its resilience in the face of devastation. The main house creaked in protest as they entered, decades of neglect evident in the water stains marking the walls and the patches of daylight visible through portions of the roof. Yet Mike moved with purpose, tapping support beams, examining foundation walls, jotting notes in a small weatherproof notebook. "Framework solid pine," he commented. "Some water damage to deal with, but nothing catastrophic. The previous owners built this place to last." Sam shook his head in amazement. "You're the only person I know who'd walk into this disaster and see potential." "Not potential," Mike corrected quietly. "Purpose." He moved to what had once been the living room, now stripped of all furnishings, save for a stone fireplace that dominated the far wall. Pulling a flashlight from his pocket, Mike examined the massive hearth, running his fingers along the mortar. "Lines." "Jenny would have loved this place," he said after a long moment of silence. Sam nodded, knowing better than to offer empty consolation. Jennifer Daniels had been gone for 3 years now, cancer claiming her with the same ruthless efficiency, with which it had taken Mike's mother decades earlier. As an army nurse, Jenny had shared Mike's dream of creating a sanctuary for veterans struggling with the return to civilian life. Her death had temporarily derailed that vision, sending Mike into a period of isolation that had worried everyone who cared about him. But 6 months ago, something had changed. Mike had emerged from his grief with renewed determination, throwing himself into research, taking courses in sustainable agriculture and trauma-informed care, reconnecting with his network of veteran support organizations. The dream he and Jenny had shared was once again moving toward reality. "Main floor is salvageable," Mike concluded, closing his notebook. "Let's check the outbuildings before we head up toward the ridge." Outside, the morning sun had burned away the fog, revealing the breathtaking landscape surrounding the neglected ranch. To the west, the Rocky Mountains rose in majestic silhouette against the blue Colorado sky. Forests of pine and aspen bordered the northern boundary of the property, while a creek, now little more than a trickle after years of drought, cut through the eastern pasture land. The largest outbuilding had once been a barn, its red paint long since faded to a dull rust. Half of the roof had collapsed, but Mike's assessment was characteristically optimistic. "We can salvage about 60% of the original structure," he noted, examining the joists that remained intact. "The foundation is excellent, poured concrete that's barely cracked despite the freeze-thaw cycles." Sam's expression remained dubious. "Even with your skills, the materials alone would cost a fortune, and that's before you start on the main house or bring in the specialized equipment for your program." Mike nodded, acknowledging the practical concerns without surrendering to them. "I've run the numbers, Sam. With my savings, Jenny's life insurance, and the VA loan I qualify for, I can make this work." "And what about Whitaker Enterprises?" Sam asked, gesturing toward a "for sale" sign that featured the developer's logo prominently beneath the listing agent's contact information. "Word around town is they've been buying up everything in Eagle Valley for some resort project." A shadow crossed Mike's face. "That's why timing is critical. My appointment with their acquisition team is tomorrow morning." They continued their survey of the property, documenting the condition of 2 smaller outbuildings, a decrepit chicken coop, and what remained of the original corral fencing. By mid-afternoon, they'd reached the ridgeline that formed the western boundary of the ranch, where the land rose steeply toward the mountains beyond. Mike paused, consulting both his topographical map and a satellite image on his phone. For several minutes, he moved methodically along the ridge, examining rock formations, vegetation patterns, and the subtle contours of the terrain. "Something it doesn't match," he murmured, more to himself than to Sam. "What do you mean?" Mike gestured toward a section of the hillside where a natural rock outcropping was partially obscured by decades of pine growth. The geological survey from 1955 shows different formations than what's here now. And look at the drainage pattern. It's been artificially modified, but made to look natural. Sam frowned, struggling to see what Mike's trained eye had detected. Could be just ordinary landscaping from when the ranch was active. Maybe. Mike didn't sound convinced. He pulled a small tool from his pocket and carefully scraped at a section of what appeared to be natural stone. After a moment, he held up the tool, showing Sam a tiny flake of grey material. This isn't natural stone. It's concrete, expertly textured and colored to mimic the surrounding rock. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sam's expression changed. Military installation. Possibly. Mike's eyes narrowed as he studied the hillside with renewed interest. The ranch's history shows it was purchased by a shell corporation in 1961, then transferred to private ownership again in 1992. Cold War era, Sam noted, his own military training engaging with the puzzle. Exactly. Mike pulled out his notebook again, sketching a rough outline of the ridge. The property records show unusual easements granted to the federal government in the early 1960s, during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Sam whistled softly. You think there's some kind of bunker built into the hillside? After all these years, wouldn't it have been documented? Not necessarily. Dozens of emergency government facilities from that era remain classified or simply forgotten. Budget cuts in the 90s led to many being decommissioned without public disclosure. Mike ran his hand along what appeared to be a natural crevice in the rock face. This positioning would be ideal. Natural camouflage, defensible approach, underground water source from the aquifer that feeds the creek. Sam watched as his former commanding officer slipped automatically into tactical assessment mode. The same methodical analysis that had saved their unit countless times in hostile territory. If you're right, Sam said slowly, this could significantly complicate your purchase plans. Government installations, even decommissioned ones, come with all kinds of restrictions and potential environmental issues. Mike nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than concerned. Or it could be exactly what I need. They spent another hour examining the ridge before heading back to the main property. As they approached the truck, Mike's phone rang. The screen displayed Eagle Valley Bank, Sarah Johnson. Mike, I've reviewed everything, Sarah said when he answered. The pre-approval is confirmed for $400,000, which combined with your cash reserves, puts you in position to make a solid offer on Rimrock. But I have to be honest, we've heard Whitaker is prepared to go substantially above asking price. I understand, Mike replied. I appreciate your help, Sarah. Just be prepared for a competitive situation tomorrow. Whitaker doesn't lose many bidding wars. After ending the call, Mike stood in silence, looking back over the neglected property, as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown fields. In his mind's eye, he could see what Rimrock might become. Not the luxury resort that Whitaker envisioned, but a place of healing and purpose. He imagined veterans working the land, finding their way back to themselves through meaningful labor and community. He could almost hear Jenny's voice describing the gardens they would plant, the animals they would raise, the lives they would help rebuild. You've got that look, Sam observed, the one you always got before a difficult mission. Mike smiled slightly. Some missions matter more than others. That evening, in his rented cabin on the outskirts of Eagle Valley, Mike spread his research. Materials across the small kitchen table, property records, geological surveys, satellite images, and historical documents formed a complex puzzle that had occupied his evenings for months. His laptop displayed an email from his nephew Bobby, a computer specialist who had helped him dig through digitized government archives. The message was brief but significant. found additional references to Project Ridgeline in declassified Defense Department budget documents from 1962-1979. No specific location mentioned, but funding levels consistent with Class A Presidential Emergency Facility construction and maintenance. Mike opened the attached files, scanning budget allocations and cryptic project codes. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. If his suspicions were correct, Rimrock Ranch concealed more than just potential for a veterans program. It might house a forgotten piece of American history. The question was how to use this information. Revealing his suspicions prematurely could drive up the property's price beyond his reach, or attract unwanted attention from historical preservation authorities before he'd secured ownership. Yet proceeding without disclosing potential historical significance raised ethical questions that troubled his straightforward nature. A framed photograph of Jenny caught his eye from across the room. She was smiling in desert camouflage, the Afghan mountains visible in the background. They'd met during his second deployment, a nurse captain assigned to the same forward surgical team that had saved one of his men after an ambush. Her combination of technical skill and compassionate strength had drawn him immediately, though. It had taken 3 months of awkward conversations before he'd worked up the courage to ask her to join him for coffee. "What would you do, Jen?" he asked aloud, the habit of speaking to her unbroken by years of absence. The answer came not in words, but in certainty. Jenny had always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. But she'd also been a strategic thinker, understanding that timing could be as important as intention. Mike's decision crystallized. He would meet with Whitaker tomorrow as planned, assess their intentions for the property, and determine whether revealing his suspicions about the hidden installation would help or hinder his ultimate goal. The Veterans Program remained his priority, but preserving historical significance could provide leverage against a corporate developer whose only interest was profit. He turned his attention to preparing for the meeting, reviewing Whitaker Enterprise's previous developments, their negotiation tactics, and the economic promises they'd used to sway local officials in similar projects across Colorado. Knowledge was tactical advantage, another lesson from his military years that served him well in civilian life. As midnight approached, Mike finally gathered his materials and moved to the small bedroom. Before turning out the light, he touched 2 fingers to his lips and then to Jenny's photograph, a private ritual that connected him to her memory each night. "Tomorrow's the first step," he whispered. "I won't let you down." Dawn broke crisp and clear over Eagle Valley as Mike dressed. For his meeting with Whitaker Enterprises, he chose his clothing deliberately. Clean but well-worn jeans, a plaid button-down shirt that had seen better days. His comfortable hiking boots scuffed from actual use rather than designer distressing. The army cap that had accompanied him through 3 deployments completed the ensemble. His appearance would lead the corporate executives to underestimate him, another tactical advantage he'd use without hesitation. Throughout his military career, Mike had learned the value of being underestimated by opponents who judged capability by appearance rather than substance. The drive to Denver gave him time to mentally review his approach. He would present himself as exactly what he was: a retired Army sergeant with a modest pension and a dream of helping fellow veterans. He would make a reasonable offer slightly below asking price, knowing it would be refused in favor of Whitaker's bid. The rejection would set the stage for his next move once he'd confirmed the existence of what he suspected lay beneath Rimrock Ranch. The Whitaker Enterprises headquarters dominated a full city block in downtown Denver, its glass and steel exterior reflecting the morning sunlight with almost painful brilliance. Mike parked his truck between 2 luxury SUVs in the visitor section, aware of the stark contrast between his vehicle and those surrounding it. Inside, the reception area gleamed with polished marble and contemporary artwork. A stunning woman, in her 30s, looked up from behind a curved desk, her expression professionally neutral as she assessed the limping veteran approaching her. "Good morning," Mike said. "Michael Daniels. I have a 10 a.m. appointment regarding Rimrock Ranch." The receptionist consulted her computer, her perfectly manicured nails clicking efficiently on the keyboard. "Yes, Mr. Daniels. Mr. Whitaker's team is expecting you. Charlotte will escort you to the conference room." Charlotte appeared moments later, a sleek young woman in a tailored suit who led Mike through a labyrinth of corridors lined with photographs of Whitaker's developments across the western United States. Each image showcased luxurious buildings nestled in previously undeveloped landscapes, golf courses carved from desert terrain, ski lodges perched on formerly pristine mountainsides, exclusive residential communities where wilderness had once stood. The conference room offered panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains through floor-to-ceiling windows. Carson Whitaker rose from his position at the head of a massive table, extending a hand in practiced welcome. In his mid-40s, Whitaker projected the confidence of a man accustomed to success. His tailored suit, carefully styled hair, and white-toothed smile, all elements of a carefully crafted image. "Mr. Daniels, welcome to Whitaker Enterprises," he said, his handshake firm but brief. "I understand you're interested in our Rimrock Ranch property." Mike noted the subtle presumption of ownership in Whitaker's phrasing, though the developer had yet to actually purchase the ranch. "Yes, I am. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. Of course, this is Victoria Haynes, our VP of Acquisitions, and Darren Price, our Head of Security and Site Assessment." Victoria offered a coolly professional handshake, while Darren, a solid man with the watchful eyes of former military or law enforcement, simply nodded in acknowledgement. "Please have a seat," Whitaker gestured to one of the leather chairs. "Can we offer you coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great," Mike replied, maintaining the relaxed demeanor of someone unaware they were already being assessed and categorized. As Charlotte departed to fetch refreshments, Whitaker leaned forward with an expression of practiced interest. "So, Mr. Daniels, what brings you to Rimrock Ranch? The listing agent mentioned you're interested in some kind of rehabilitation program." "That's right," Mike confirmed. "I'm looking to establish a residential program for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. Rimrock offers the space and isolation that would benefit participants dealing with PTSD and related challenges." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. An admirable goal, certainly, though the property would require significant rehabilitation itself before it could serve that purpose. "I'm aware of the condition issues," Mike replied. "As a military engineer, I've assessed the structural requirements and developed a phased renovation plan that would allow portions to become operational within 6 months." Darren spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the clipped precision that confirmed Mike's suspicion of a military background. "You have construction experience?" 22 years in the Army Corps of Engineers," Mike replied. "Specialized in rapid deployment of field facilities and structural assessment in compromised environments." A flicker of reassessment crossed Darren's face, one professional recognizing another. Whitaker, however, maintained his benevolently patronizing expression. "Impressive background," the developer said, "though commercial construction presents different challenges than military applications." Charlotte returned with coffee service on a silver tray, momentarily interrupting the conversation. When she departed, Whitaker touched a control pad embedded in the conference table. A large screen on the far wall illuminated with renderings of a luxury resort complex superimposed over aerial views of Rimrock Ranch. "Mr. Daniels, I believe in transparency in business dealings," Whitaker began, gesturing toward the images. Whitaker Enterprises has been developing plans for Eagle Valley Estates for the past 18 months. The project represents a $200 million investment in the region, creating jobs, generating tax revenue, and elevating the profile of a community currently struggling with economic stagnation. The renderings showed Rimrock Ranch transform beyond recognition. The main house expanded into a grand lodge, the pastures replaced with a golf course, luxury cabins dotting the hillsides, and a spa complex situated near the creek. Our offer for Rimrock Ranch is $950,000, substantially above the asking price, Victoria stated. We have financing in place for immediate closing, and development would begin within 30 days of transfer. Mike nodded thoughtfully, sipping his coffee. Impressive plans. Though they seem at odds with Eagle Valley's character as a working ranching community, Whitaker's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened slightly. Communities evolve, Mr. Daniels. Eagle Valley's traditional industries are failing. Our development brings prosperity and opportunity to a region that desperately needs both. At the cost of its identity, Mike observed quietly. Progress always involves transformation, Whitaker countered smoothly. Now, while we respect your interest in the property, I think it's important you understand the competitive reality. The sellers are motivated to close quickly, and our offer provides certainty they're unlikely to find elsewhere. Mike set down his coffee cup. I understand. I'm prepared to offer $875,000, contingent on structural inspection, with proof of funds and closing within 45 days. The figures, carefully calculated to be both credible and insufficient, had exactly the effect Mike anticipated. Victoria exchanged a glance with Whitaker, her expression conveying professional dismissal of competition deemed inadequate. A fair offer under normal circumstances, Whitaker acknowledged with practiced diplomacy. However, given our development plans and the premium we're prepared to pay, I think you'll find the sellers strongly inclined toward our proposal. Mike maintained his calm demeanor. Perhaps, though I imagine local sentiment might favor a use that preserves the character of the community rather than fundamentally altering it. Local sentiment doesn't sign closing documents, Victoria observed coolly. Financial certainty does. Fair point, Mike conceded, though I wonder if your certainty includes contingency planning for the potential historical significance of the property. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was perceptible only to those trained to detect it, a momentary tension in Whitaker's posture, a sharpening of Darren's gaze. Historical significance? Whitaker repeated, his tone carefully. Neutral. The property records show nothing of particular historic value. Standard agricultural use since initial homesteading in the 1880s. Mike nodded, neither confirming nor contradicting the developer's statement. Eagle Valley has a rich history, worth investigating thoroughly before development plans are finalized. Victoria's professional mask remained firmly in place, but her voice carried a new edge of impatience. Our environmental and historical assessments are always thorough, Mr. Daniels. If the property held any significant historical value, our research would have identified it. I'm sure your research is excellent, Mike replied, rising to his feet with the assistance of the table edge, his right leg stiff after sitting. I appreciate your time and transparency regarding your plans. It helps clarify my next steps. Whitaker stood as well, extending his hand with the practiced ease of a man concluding a discussion he'd controlled from the beginning. We appreciate your service to our country, Mr. Daniels. Your vision for helping veterans is commendable, and I'm sure there are other properties better suited to your needs and budget. Mike accepted the handshake, noting the subtle emphasis on budget and the dismissal disguised as helpful redirection. Thank you for the coffee and the information. I'll be in touch with the listing agent regarding my offer. A B. As Charlotte appeared to escort him back to reception, Mike noticed Darren already moving toward Whitaker, their heads bent in quiet conversation. The former officer's body language suggested concern rather than the dismissive confidence displayed by his employer. Outside in the bright Colorado sunshine, Mike paused beside his truck, gazing back at the gleaming Whitaker Enterprises headquarters. The meeting had confirmed what he'd suspected. The developers had no knowledge of what potentially lay beneath Rimrock Ranch, and their interest was purely commercial. Now it was time for phase 2 of his approach. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd programmed earlier that morning. Dr. Chen, Michael Daniels. I'd like to discuss that potential historical site I mentioned. Yes, I've confirmed the property is under active consideration for development. How soon could you conduct a preliminary assessment? The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Rimrock Ranch as Mike and Sam made their way back toward the vehicles. Mike's discovery of the artificial stonework had shifted the entire landscape of possibility for the property, adding layers of complexity to an already challenging situation. If this is what you suspect, Sam said, keeping his voice low, despite the isolation of their location, you're going to need expert verification before making any claims. Mike nodded, his mind already mapping out the necessary steps. I've got a contact at Colorado State, Dr. Lisa Chen. She specializes in Cold War-era government installations, worked with some historical preservation projects at decommissioned military sites. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? Sam gave his former commander a sideways glance. Planning? No! Mike adjusted his cap against the setting sun. But I've been researching possibilities. The property records raised questions months ago. Shell corporations, unusual easements, the timing of ownership transfers. When I saw the satellite terrain imagery, the pieces started coming together. Back at the main house, Mike took one final walk through the deteriorating structure, his experienced eye cataloging priorities: roof stabilization, structural reinforcement, utility restoration. Despite the discovery on the ridge, the ranch house remained central to his vision. This would be the gathering place for veterans in his program, a communal hub where meals would be shared and stories exchanged. Sam waited by the trucks, speaking quietly on his phone. As Mike approached, he ended the call. That was Andrea, Sam said, mentioning his wife. She's excited about your project. Says to tell you she's already researching grant opportunities for veteran rehabilitation programs. Mike smiled. Andrea Reynolds had been an occupational therapist at the VA when she and Sam met. Her understanding of the challenges facing returning veterans would be invaluable when his vision became reality. Tell her I appreciate it. Once we get past the acquisition phase, I'll take all the help I can get. As they prepared to leave, Mike stood for a moment, looking back over the neglected property bathed in golden afternoon light. Through the decay and abandonment, he could see what Rimrock Ranch had once been and what it could become again. Not the sterile luxury resort Whitaker envisioned, but a working landscape where damaged people and damaged land could heal together. You've got that look again, Sam observed, climbing into his truck. The one that means you're already 10 steps ahead in a battle plan. Mike nodded, his expression resolute. Tomorrow's just the first engagement. Whitaker thinks he's dealing with a nostalgic veteran with unrealistic dreams. That's an advantage I intend to use. That evening, after Sam had departed for his hotel in town, Mike sat at the small desk in his rented cabin, methodically organizing his research. The topographical anomalies, property records, and government easements formed a compelling but circumstantial case. To leverage his suspicions effectively, he needed more. He opened his laptop and composed an email to Dr. Lisa Chen, summarizing his observations without revealing the exact location. Academic curiosity would ensure her interest. But professional thoroughness would require evidence before she'd stake her reputation on any claims. Next, he called his nephew Bobby Miller, an Army intelligence specialist recently transitioned to civilian cybersecurity work. "Uncle Mike, what's up?" Bobby's voice carried the perpetual enthusiasm that even 3 tours in active conflict zones, and hadn't diminished. "Need another favor," Mike replied. "Remember those declassified Cold War facility documents you found for me? The presidential contingency locations?" "Sure. Found them in the digitized archives from the Congressional Budget Office. Pretty dry reading. I need you to cross-reference any mentions of Project Ridgeline with geological surveys from Colorado between 1960 and 1965. Particularly looking for any surveys commissioned by the Department of Defense or shell corporations, linked to government contractors." Bobby's keyboard clicked rapidly in the background. "This is about that ranch you're interested in, isn't it? The one near Eagle Valley?" "Potentially, just following a hunch. Your hunches kept our unit alive in Helmand Province. I'll see what I can find." After ending the call, Mike spread out the satellite images of Rimrock Ranch, studying the terrain with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading landscapes for strategic advantage. The ridgeline anomaly was subtle, visible, only when comparing historical geological surveys with current imagery. The careful camouflage spoke of significant resources and expertise, hallmarks of high-priority government projects during the Cold War era. If his suspicions proved correct, Rimrock Ranch concealed more than just potential for veteran rehabilitation. It contained a historically significant installation that could alter the entire equation with Whitaker Enterprises. The question was how to confirm his theory without alerting the developer to the property's potential value. His phone rang, displaying Sarah Johnson's number from Eagle Valley Bank. "Mike, I've been reviewing your financials again," Sarah began without preamble. "If you need to go higher on your offer, we might be able to structure something. The collateral value of the property supports it, even given the condition issues." "I appreciate that, Sarah. Let's see how tomorrow's meeting goes before making adjustments." "Just be prepared. Word around town is Whitaker's been making generous donations to the Historical Society and Parks Department, laying groundwork for community support of his development plans." "A buying goodwill," Mike observed. "Effectively," Sarah agreed. "Mayor Bennett practically gushes about the economic potential whenever Whitaker's name comes up. Just don't want you walking in there unprepared for the political landscape." After thanking Sarah for the intelligence, Mike turned his attention to preparing for the morning's meeting. Whitaker Enterprises represented formidable opposition, wealthy, politically connected, and accustomed to getting what they wanted. Their dismissal of a limping veteran with modest resources would be immediate and complete, exactly as Mike intended. His military career had taught him the strategic advantage of being underestimated. As a young lieutenant, he'd learned that opponents who dismissed you based on appearance or background rarely saw the true threat until it was too late. It was a lesson he'd applied successfully through 3 combat deployments and countless negotiations with tribal leaders and local officials in conflict zones. Tomorrow, he would present himself exactly as Whitaker expected, an idealistic veteran with an unrealistic dream. The developer would dismiss him, focus on securing local political support, and proceed with confidence toward acquiring Rimrock Ranch for the resort project. Meanwhile, Mike would be executing Phase 2, confirming the existence of what he suspected lay beneath the ridgeline, and using that knowledge at precisely the right moment. His phone chimed with an incoming text from Bobby. "Found something interesting. Geological survey from 1964, commissioned by Ridgeline Development Corporation. Same company shows up in DoD budget allocation documents from same period. Sending. Our files now." Mike opened the attachments, scanning the technical reports with growing satisfaction. The survey focused extensively on the exact section of ridgeline that had caught his attention, documenting water tables, rock composition, and stability factors, all critical considerations for underground construction. A second message arrived. Moments later, also found this in digitized photo archives from National Reconnaissance Office, declassified satellite imagery from 1963. Check the construction vehicles at the coordinates I've marked. The grainy black and white image showed what appeared to be heavy construction equipment at the base of the ridge. Concrete mixers, excavators, and what looked like specialized drilling equipment used for mountainside tunneling. Mike smiled slightly. The pieces were coming together, forming a picture that might just be the key to securing Rimrock Ranch for his veterans program rather than Whitaker's luxury resort. He sent a quick reply to Bobby. "Good work, keep digging. Anything on presidential? Visits to Colorado during that period?" The response came almost immediately. "Working on it. Preliminary search shows unusual Secret Service activity in Eagle County during summer 1962 and again in October 1963. Requisitions for additional personnel and specialized communications equipment." Just as Mike was processing this new information, an email arrived from Dr. Chen. "Intriguing observations. Would need ground verification for any definitive assessment. If this is a previously undocumented C3 facility from the FEMA predecessor agency, could be historically significant. Available for site visit Thursday if you can arrange access." Mike checked his calendar. Thursday was 3 days away, likely before any deal with Whitaker would be finalized. Dr. Chen's expertise would be crucial in confirming what the evidence increasingly suggested, that Rimrock Ranch concealed a presidential emergency facility built during one of the most tense periods of the Cold War. Such a discovery would change everything. Historical preservation requirements would complicate or potentially derail Whitaker's development plans. The property's significance would attract attention from federal agencies and historical societies, creating legal and regulatory hurdles that even Whitaker's money and connections couldn't easily overcome. But first, Mike needed to complete tomorrow's meeting, presenting himself as a non-threat, allowing Whitaker to dismiss him while gathering intelligence on the developers' timeline and tactics. The morning arrived clear and cool, typical Colorado perfection that made the 2-hour drive to Denver almost enjoyable despite the gravity of Mike's mission. He deliberately chose his most worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, though both were meticulously clean, a habit ingrained through decades of military discipline. The Whitaker Enterprises headquarters occupied prime real estate in downtown Denver, its gleaming glass facade reflecting the mountain landscape it sought to commercialize. Mike's truck looked conspicuously out of place in the visitors' parking area, surrounded by luxury vehicles with spotless finishes and dealer tags. Inside, the reception area epitomized corporate success. Modern art installations, leather seating areas, and staff who looked like they'd stepped from fashion magazines. Mike approached the reception desk, noting how the young woman's polite smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she assessed his appearance. "I have a 10 a.m. appointment with Mr. Whitaker's team," he said. "Michael Daniels, regarding Rimrock Ranch." Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped at her keyboard. "Yes, Mr. Daniels. I'll let them know you're here. Please have a seat." Mike chose a chair that gave him clear sightlines to both the elevator, a bank, and the main entrance, another habit from years in environments where situational awareness meant survival. From this vantage point, he observed the flow of staff and visitors, noting the deferential body language directed towards certain individuals, identifying the hierarchy within the corporate ecosystem. After precisely 7 minutes, a striking woman in her late 30s approached, hand extended. "Mr. Daniels, Victoria Haynes, VP of Acquisitions for Whitaker Enterprises. Thank you for coming in today." Mike rose, accepting her handshake with a firm grip that seemed to surprise her slightly. "Appreciate the opportunity, Ms. Haynes. Please follow me. Carson and the team are ready for you." And as they walked toward the elevator, Mike maintained his observant silence, noting the project renderings displayed along the corridors, luxury developments in previously undeveloped locations, each showcasing the Whitaker aesthetic of imposing, modern structures cutting into natural landscapes. The conference room offered panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains, an ironic backdrop for discussions about developing one of the few remaining unspoiled properties in Eagle Valley. Carson Whitaker rose as they entered, his custom suit and artificially whitened smile projecting calculated success and confidence. "Mr. Daniels, welcome," Whitaker said, extending his hand. "I understand you're interested in our Rimrock Ranch opportunity." Mike noted the presumptuous phrasing, "our ranch," though they hadn't yet acquired the property. "Thank you for making time, Mr. Whitaker. Please call me Carson. This is Darren Price, our head of security and site assessment, and you've already met Victoria." "Coffee?" "Black, thank you," Mike replied, taking the offered seat. As pleasantries were exchanged and coffee served, Mike observed the team dynamics. Whitaker dominated naturally, but Victoria clearly directed the operational aspects of acquisitions. Darren Price remained watchful, his posture and scanning gaze suggesting military or law enforcement background, likely the most dangerous person in the room in terms of seeing beyond Mike's deliberately modest presentation. "So, Michael," Whitaker began, leaning forward with practiced interest, "Victoria tells me you're interested in Rimrock for some kind of veterans program." "That's right," Mike confirmed. "A residential rehabilitation center focused on transition assistance, particularly for veterans dealing with PTSD and reintegration challenges." "Admirable," Whitaker nodded with professional sympathy. "A buying goodwill," Mike observed. "Effectively," Sarah agreed. "Mayor Bennett practically gushes about the economic potential whenever Whitaker's name comes up. Just don't want you walking in there unprepared for the political landscape." After thanking Sarah for the intelligence, Mike turned his attention to preparing for the morning's meeting. Whitaker Enterprises represented formidable opposition, wealthy, politically connected, and accustomed to getting what they wanted. Their dismissal of a limping veteran with modest resources would be immediate and complete, exactly as Mike intended. His military career had taught him the strategic advantage of being underestimated. As a young lieutenant, he'd learned that opponents who dismissed you based on appearance or background rarely saw the true threat until it was too late. It was a lesson he'd applied successfully through 3 combat deployments and countless negotiations with tribal leaders and local officials in conflict zones. Tomorrow, he would present himself exactly as Whitaker expected, an idealistic veteran with an unrealistic dream. The developer would dismiss him, focus on securing local political support, and proceed with confidence toward acquiring Rimrock Ranch for the resort project. Meanwhile, Mike would be executing Phase 2, confirming the existence of what he suspected lay beneath the ridgeline, and using that knowledge at precisely the right moment. His phone chimed with an incoming text from Bobby. "Found something interesting. Geological survey from 1964, commissioned by Ridgeline Development Corporation. Same company shows up in DoD budget allocation documents from same period. Sending. Our files now." Mike opened the attachments, scanning the technical reports with growing satisfaction. The survey focused extensively on the exact section of ridgeline that had caught his attention, documenting water tables, rock composition, and stability factors, all critical considerations for underground construction. A second message arrived. Moments later, also found this in digitized photo archives from National Reconnaissance Office, declassified satellite imagery from 1963. Check the construction vehicles at the coordinates I've marked. The grainy black and white image showed what appeared to be heavy construction equipment at the base of the ridge. Concrete mixers, excavators, and what looked like specialized drilling equipment used for mountainside tunneling. Mike smiled slightly. The pieces were coming together, forming a picture that might just be the key to securing Rimrock Ranch for his veterans program rather than Whitaker's luxury resort. He sent a quick reply to Bobby. "Good work. Keep digging. Anything on presidential? Visits to Colorado during that period?" The response came almost immediately. "Working on it. Preliminary search shows unusual Secret Service activity in Eagle County during summer 1962 and again in October 1963. Requisitions for additional personnel and specialized communications equipment." Just as Mike was processing this new information, an email arrived from Dr. Chen. "Intriguing observations. Would need ground verification for any definitive assessment. If this is a previously undocumented C3 facility from the FEMA predecessor agency, could be historically significant. Available for site visit Thursday if you can arrange access." Mike checked his calendar. Thursday was 3 days away, likely before any deal with Whitaker would be finalized. Dr. Chen's expertise would be crucial in confirming what the evidence increasingly suggested, that Rimrock Ranch concealed a presidential emergency facility built during one of the most tense periods of the Cold War. Such a discovery would change everything. Historical preservation requirements would complicate or potentially derail Whitaker's development plans. The property's significance would attract attention from federal agencies and historical societies, creating legal and regulatory hurdles that even Whitaker's money and connections couldn't easily overcome. But first, Mike needed to complete tomorrow's meeting, presenting himself as a non-threat, allowing Whitaker to dismiss him while gathering intelligence on the developers' timeline and tactics. The morning arrived clear and cool, typical Colorado perfection that made the 2-hour drive to Denver almost enjoyable despite the gravity of Mike's mission. He deliberately chose his most worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, though both were meticulously clean, a habit ingrained through decades of military discipline. The Whitaker Enterprises headquarters occupied prime real estate in downtown Denver, its gleaming glass facade reflecting the mountain landscape it sought to commercialize. Mike's truck looked conspicuously out of place in the visitors' parking area, surrounded by luxury vehicles with spotless finishes and dealer tags. Inside, the reception area epitomized corporate success. Modern art installations, leather seating areas, and staff who looked like they'd stepped from fashion magazines. Mike approached the reception desk, noting how the young woman's polite smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she assessed his appearance. "I have a 10 a.m. appointment with Mr. Whitaker's team," he said. "Michael Daniels, regarding Rimrock Ranch." Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped at her keyboard. "Yes, Mr. Daniels. I'll let them know you're here. Please have a seat." Mike chose a chair that gave him clear sightlines to both the elevator, a bank, and the main entrance, another habit from years in environments where situational awareness meant survival. From this vantage point, he observed the flow of staff and visitors, noting the deferential body language directed towards certain individuals, identifying the hierarchy within the corporate ecosystem. After precisely 7 minutes, a striking woman in her late 30s approached, hand extended. "Mr. Daniels, Victoria Haynes, VP of Acquisitions for Whitaker Enterprises. Thank you for coming in today." Mike rose, accepting her handshake with a firm grip that seemed to surprise her slightly. "Appreciate the opportunity, Ms. Haynes. Please follow me. Carson and the team are ready for you." And as they walked toward the elevator, Mike maintained his observant silence, noting the project renderings displayed along the corridors, luxury developments in previously undeveloped locations, each showcasing the Whitaker aesthetic of imposing, modern structures cutting into natural landscapes. The conference room offered panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains, an ironic backdrop for discussions about developing one of the few remaining unspoiled properties in Eagle Valley. Carson Whitaker rose as they entered, his custom suit and artificially whitened smile projecting calculated success and confidence. "Mr. Daniels, welcome," Whitaker said, extending his hand. "I understand you're interested in our Rimrock Ranch opportunity." Mike noted the presumptuous phrasing, "our ranch," though they hadn't yet acquired the property. "Thank you for making time, Mr. Whitaker. Please call me Carson. This is Darren Price, our head of security and site assessment, and you've already met Victoria." "Coffee?" "Black, thank you," Mike replied, taking the offered seat. As pleasantries were exchanged and coffee served, Mike observed the team dynamics. Whitaker dominated naturally, but Victoria clearly directed the operational aspects of acquisitions. Darren Price remained watchful, his posture and scanning gaze suggesting military or law enforcement background, likely the most dangerous person in the room in terms of seeing beyond Mike's deliberately modest presentation. "So, Michael," Whitaker began, leaning forward with practiced interest, "Victoria tells me you're interested in Rimrock for some kind of veterans program." "That's right," Mike confirmed. "A residential rehabilitation center focused on transition assistance, particularly for veterans dealing with PTSD and reintegration challenges." "Admirable," Whitaker nodded with professional sympathy. "Or would it qualify for historical preservation status?" Mike asked, getting to the critical question. "Potentially, yes, especially if it contains original equipment, documentation, or other artifacts from the period. The Cold War-era presidential contingency network is of significant historical interest, particularly facilities constructed during crisis periods like the Cuban Missile Crisis. What would we need to confirm its existence and historical significance? Ground penetrating. Radar would be the first step, followed by location and examination of access points. If we can document the facility's existence and connection to presidential emergency planning, we could initiate the process for historical designation." Mike considered this information carefully. "How quickly could you conduct a preliminary assessment?" "I could arrange equipment and a small team for Thursday, as I mentioned, but we would need legal access to the property." "I'll arrange it," Mike promised. "The current owners have granted me inspection rights as part of my purchase consideration." After ending the call, Mike contacted the listing agent, confirming his formal offer for Rimrock Ranch and scheduling another property inspection for Thursday. The agent sounded skeptical about his chances against Whitaker's offer, but agreed to present both proposals to the sellers. That evening, Mike drove into Eagle Valley, stopping at the small historical society housed in the town's original schoolhouse. The volunteer curator, Martha Williams, greeted him warmly. "Mike Daniels, haven't seen you in here before. What brings you to our little collection of local history?" "Research project," Mike replied with a friendly smile. "I'm interested in any information you might have about Rimrock Ranch, particularly during the 1960s. Martha's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone rarely asked about their passion. "Rimrock, one of our oldest ranching properties. Let me see what we have in the archives." She disappeared into a back room, returning several minutes later with the dusty folder. "Not much, I'm afraid. The property was owned by the Mitchell family until 1961, when they sold to some corporation based in Delaware. Rimrock Development, I think it was called. Locals didn't see much activity after that. No cattle operations, minimal farming. The property seemed to sit mostly idle, though there was construction activity up near the ridge for about a year." "Odd construction?" Mike asked, keeping his tone conversational. "What kind?" Roads, mostly, improved the access to the western section. Locals thought they might be planning some kind of hunting lodge, but nothing came of it. Oh, and there was a period when there seemed to be a lot of government vehicles coming and going. Some folks thought it might be geological surveys for mining potential. Mike nodded, maintaining his casual demeanor while his mind processed this confirmation of his theory. Any records of who bought it from the development corporation? Martha shook her head. It stayed under corporate ownership until the early 1990s, then transferred to private owners, the Hendersons. They tried to restart the ranching operation but struggled. After they defaulted on their loans in 2013, it's just been sitting there, changing hands between banks and investment groups trying to unload it. Any unusual visitors during the corporate ownership period? Government officials, perhaps? Martha's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You know, my father used to tell a story about a big commotion in town sometime in the early 60s. Said important-looking government types were everywhere for a couple of days. Black cars, men in suits asking people to stay away from the western road toward Rimrock. Town rumor was that someone important was visiting, but it was never confirmed who. She leaned closer with the air of someone sharing a confidence. Dad always claimed it was President Kennedy, but most folks thought he was exaggerating. Though with all these government declassifications these days, who knows? Why the interest in old Rimrock, if you don't mind my asking? Mike offered a partial truth. I'm considering purchasing it, looking to establish a rehabilitation program for veterans there. Martha's expression softened. That would be wonderful for the community. Much better than that resort Whitaker wants to build. Between you and me, a lot of folks around here aren't thrilled about becoming the next Aspen or Vale, despite what the mayor says about economic opportunities. This information aligned with what Mike had suspected. Official support for Whitaker's development didn't necessarily reflect broader community sentiment, another potential advantage he could leverage at the right moment. As he left the Historical Society, Mike's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Johnson. Heard from listing. Agent Whitaker increasing offer to 1. Hamas putting pressure on sellers for quick decision. Thought you should know. The escalation suggested Whitaker might be feeling some urgency. Perhaps Darren Price had taken Mike's casual reference to historical significance more seriously than his employers. If the security chief had military background as Mike suspected, he might have recognized the potential implications of Cold War-era government involvement with the property. Mike called Sarah back immediately. Any chance of arranging a meeting with the sellers directly, before they make a decision? Difficult, Sarah replied after a moment's consideration. They're an investment group based in Chicago, dealing exclusively through their agent. But their representative is coming to town tomorrow for a final property review before accepting offers. I could potentially arrange an introduction. I'd appreciate that, Mike said. And Sarah, if necessary, I can go to $925,000, but let's hold that in reserve for now. The following morning brought a flurry of developments. Bobby called early, excitement evident in his voice. Uncle Mike, hit the jackpot with those Kennedy. Library archives found a memo from the Secret Service advance team referring to ridgeline inspection during a Colorado visit in August 1962. And get this, there's a reference to the facility being designated as Eagle's Nest in the official security documentation. Eagle's Nest, Mike repeated, the name resonating with the location in Eagle Valley. Anything else? Working on it. The archivist is helping me access some recently declassified Defense Department files that might have more details. Should have something by this afternoon. Mike had just ended the call when an email arrived from Dr. Chen with the subject line, "Research team confirmed." She had secured the necessary equipment and personnel for Thursday's inspection, along with a preliminary historical assessment based on the documentation Mike had provided. Her analysis indicated a high probability that Rimrock Ranch contained what Cold War historians referred to as a Class A presidential emergency facility, designed for extended occupation during nuclear crisis, with communication capabilities, living quarters, and potentially significant historical artifacts from the period. If confirmed, such a facility would almost certainly qualify for historical preservation status, potentially complicating or preventing Whitaker's development plans for the property. Mike was reviewing this information when Sarah called. "Good news. I've arranged for you to meet with Gregory Phillips from the investment group that owns Rimrock. He'll be at the property at 2 p.m. today for a final inspection before they make a decision on offers." "Perfect timing," Mike replied, already planning his approach. "Any other movement from Whitaker?" "Yes, actually. The mayor has called a special town council session for Friday evening to discuss economic development opportunities for Eagle Valley. Reading between the lines, it's to fast-track approval for Whitaker's zoning change requests for Rimrock." Mike checked his calendar. The timing worked in his favor. Dr. Chen's assessment on Thursday would give him the evidence he needed before Friday's council meeting. "One more thing," Sarah added, her voice lowering slightly. "Whitaker's security. Chief Price, I think his name is, has been asking questions around town about you. Wanted to know about your background, how long you've been interested in Rimrock." "Interesting," Mike replied, unsurprised but noting that his reference to historical significance had definitely registered with the former military man. "Thanks for the heads up." At 1:45 p.m., Mike arrived at Rimrock Ranch for his meeting with the property representative. He deliberately parked his truck near the ridgeline, positioning it so that the meeting would naturally occur with the area of interest as a backdrop. Gregory Phillips arrived precisely at 2 p.m., his luxury SUV raising dust clouds as it navigated the neglected access road. He emerged looking distinctly out of place in the rural setting, expensive loafers already collecting dust, tailored suit inappropriate for the rustic surroundings. "Mr. Daniels?" he called, spotting Mike near the ridge. "Gregory Phillips, Midwest Investment Partners. Sarah Johnson spoke highly of you." Mike approached, offering a firm handshake. "Appreciate you taking the time, Mr. Phillips. I wanted to discuss my offer for the property directly." Phillips nodded, glancing around with thinly veiled distaste for the dilapidated surroundings. "I understand you're proposing $875,000 contingent on inspection. As I'm sure you're aware, we have a substantially higher offer from Whitaker Enterprises." "I am," Mike acknowledged, "but I believe there are factors beyond the raw numbers that might interest your investment group." Phillips raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Such as?" "First, my offer comes with fewer complications. I intend to preserve the existing structures and natural features, meaning minimal regulatory hurdles or community resistance. While admirable, Mr. Daniels, my clients are primarily concerned with maximizing return on investment. Community sentiment doesn't affect their bottom line." Mike nodded, having anticipated this response. "Understood. But what about historical preservation requirements?" Phillips frowned. "There are no historical designations on this property. Our due diligence was thorough." "Perhaps not yet," Mike replied carefully. "But I've uncovered evidence suggesting Rimrock Ranch may contain a previously undocumented Cold War-era presidential emergency facility. If confirmed, that would trigger historical preservation reviews that could significantly delay or prevent Whitaker's development plans." Phillips stared at him, momentarily speechless. "That's an extraordinary claim, Mr. Daniels." "One I'm prepared to substantiate," Mike assured him. "I've engaged Dr. Lisa Chen from Colorado State University, a recognized expert in Cold War historical preservation. Her preliminary assessment based on government records suggests high probability of a significant installation beneath this ridge line. He gestured to the area behind them. "And you have evidence of this?" Phillips asked, his professional demeanor now tinged with uncertainty. "Declassified documents indicating construction of a facility codenamed Eagle's Nest during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Unusual Secret Service activity in the area coinciding with presidential movements, and property records showing government easements that have never been fully explained." Mike watched as Phillips processed this information, the investment manager clearly calculating how it might affect their transaction. "If your claim proves accurate," Phillips said slowly, "it could indeed complicate Whitaker's development plans, but it would likely impact your intended use as well." "Not necessarily," Mike countered. "My veterans program could coexist with historical preservation of the facility. In fact, involvement in preservation efforts could provide meaningful employment opportunities for program participants." Phillips nodded thoughtfully. "A creative approach, but from our perspective as sellers, this information potentially changes the property's value profile, possibly raising it significantly. If historical designation brings grant funding possibilities." Mike had anticipated this negotiating position, or significantly decreasing it if development restrictions limit potential buyers. Historical designation is a double-edged sword from a market value perspective. The investment manager smiled, slightly acknowledging the point. "You've clearly done your homework, Mr. Daniels. What exactly are you proposing?" "I'll maintain my offer at $875,000, but remove the inspection contingency. In exchange, I'd ask that you delay accepting Whitaker's offer until after Dr. Chen conducts her preliminary assessment on Thursday. If her findings confirm the historical significance, we both benefit from making informed decisions." Phillips considered this proposal, his business instincts clearly engaged by the unusual situation. "That's not unreasonable, though I'd need to discuss it with my partners." "Of course," Mike agreed. "I should note that if Whitaker proceeds without awareness of the potential historical issues, they could face significant regulatory complications and public relations challenges once construction begins. As sellers, you might want to consider disclosure responsibilities." This subtle reference to potential legal liability struck home. Phillips frowned, pulling out his phone. "Let me make a quick call." As Phillips stepped away for privacy, Mike surveyed the ridgeline once more, increasingly confident in his assessment. The artificial contouring, unusual drainage patterns, and strategic positioning all aligned with known characteristics of presidential emergency facilities from the early 1960s. After several minutes, Phillips returned. "My partners are intrigued by your information, Mr. Daniels. We've agreed to delay our decision until Friday morning, giving you time for this historical assessment. However, we'll need some form of documentation from Dr. Chen regarding her preliminary findings to justify further delay to Whitaker. She'll provide an initial assessment letter by Thursday evening," Mike promised. They shook hands, Phillips looking considerably less certain than when he'd arrived. As the investment manager returned to his vehicle, he paused. "Just out of curiosity, Mr. Daniels, how did you identify this potential historical site when our own property assessments missed it entirely?" Mike allowed himself a slight smile. 22 years in military engineering teaches you to see what others miss. Sometimes the most valuable things are hidden in plain sight. As Phillips's SUV disappeared down the access road, Mike pulled out his phone to update Dr. Chen on the successful negotiation of time for her assessment. The next phase of his plan was now in motion, establishing evidence of the historical significance before Friday's town council meeting. What had begun as a straightforward mission to secure Rimrock Ranch for his veterans program had evolved into something more complex and potentially more significant. If his suspicions proved correct, he wouldn't just be creating a healing space. For fellow veterans, he'd be preserving an important piece of American history. The irony wasn't lost on Mike. The same Cold War that had shaped military strategy during his early career might now provide the strategic advantage he needed against Whitaker's development ambitions. History had a way of revealing itself at precisely the right moment for those patient enough to recognize its patterns. Dawn broke crisp and clear over Eagle Valley on Thursday morning. Mike sat at his small kitchen table, reviewing the material Bobby had sent overnight. Declassified memos, budget appropriations with strategic sections redacted, and most compelling, a grainy photograph dated October 1962, showing what appeared to be President Kennedy boarding a helicopter at Peterson Air Force Base with a notation referencing Eagle's Nest inspection. The timing aligned perfectly with the Cuban Missile Crisis, when nuclear tensions had reached their apex. His phone rang precisely at 7 a.m. It was Darren Price, Whitaker's head of security. "Mr. Daniels, Darren Price. Hope I'm not calling too early." "You've been up for hours?" Mike replied truthfully. "What can I do for you?" "I was hoping we might meet for coffee this morning. There are some aspects of Rimrock that I'd like to discuss with you outside the formal channels." Mike considered the request. Price's military background had been evident in their first meeting. The way he carried himself, his situational awareness, his instinctive assessment of Mike's own capabilities. This call confirmed Mike's suspicion that his casual mention of historical significance had registered with the security chief, if not with Whitaker himself. "The Ponderosa Cafe in 30 minutes? Perfect," Price agreed. "And Mr. Daniels, I'd prefer if this meeting stayed between us for now." "Deal." The Ponderosa occupied a log cabin at the edge of town. Its early morning clientele, a mix of ranchers starting their day and local retirees gathering for their daily coffee clatch. Mike arrived early, choosing a corner table that allowed him to observe both the entrance and the parking lot. Price arrived precisely on time, dressed casually in jeans and a fleece jacket that helped him blend in far better than his tailored suit had in their previous meeting. He nodded to Mike, ordered coffee at the counter, and joined him at the table. "I appreciate you meeting me," Price began, keeping his voice low. "I wanted to discuss your comments about potential historical significance at Rimrock." Mike studied him for a moment. "What's your background, Mr. Price? Military?" A flicker of surprise crossed Price's face. "Marines, 23 years, Force Recon." Mike nodded. "Special operations." That explained the heightened situational awareness. "And you?" Price asked. "Army Corps of Engineers, 22 years, specialized in infrastructure assessment and security consulting." A moment of mutual recognition passed between them. The unspoken acknowledgement between two career military men who recognized each other's training despite the civilian clothes. "Then you understand why I'm concerned," Price continued. "Your comment about historical significance caught my attention. Mr. Whitaker dismissed it, but I've learned to take such things seriously." Mike considered his response carefully. This conversation could either strengthen his position or alert Whitaker to the full significance of what might lie beneath Rimrock Ranch. "I've uncovered evidence suggesting the property may contain a decommissioned presidential emergency facility from the early 60s, Mike said, watching Price's reaction closely. "Cold War era, possibly constructed during the Cuban Missile Crisis." Price's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "That would explain some anomalies in my security assessment of the property." "What kind of anomalies?" "Unexplained power infrastructure, ground subsidence patterns, inconsistent with natural terrain, a geological survey that doesn't match satellite imagery." Price took a sip of his coffee. "My job is threat assessment, Mr. Daniels. I flag potential issues that might impact Mr. Whitaker's developments." And a historical site would definitely qualify. Price nodded. If confirmed, it would trigger federal reviews, preservation, requirements, possibly even classified material protocols. It would significantly complicate our development timeline. Or make it impossible, Mike suggested. Possibly, Price acknowledged. Which brings me to the purpose of this meeting. Mr. Whitaker is pushing hard to close this deal quickly. The town council meeting tomorrow is meant to fast-track rezoning approval. I need to know if your concerns about historical significance are substantiated. Mike considered his options carefully. Price seemed to be operating independently of Whitaker, perhaps out of professional thoroughness, perhaps due to his military background and respect for historical significance. Either way, he represented a potential ally, or at least a source, of leverage. I have a historical preservation expert conducting a preliminary assessment today, Mike said. Dr. Lisa Chen from Colorado State. She specializes in Cold War facilities. Price nodded. I'm familiar with her work. If she confirms your suspicions, what are your intentions? My interest in Rimrock remains the same. A rehabilitation center for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. The historical elements could actually enhance that mission, providing educational and preservation opportunities. Price studied him for a long moment. And if Whitaker's offer is accepted before your assessment is complete, then I'd be obligated to share my findings with the relevant historical preservation authorities, Mike said evenly, which would likely trigger a review process regardless of who owns the property. Price nodded slowly. I understand. I appreciate your candor, Mr. Daniels. He stood, extending his hand. I'll need to include potential historical significance in my security assessment to Mr. Whitaker. Off the record, I hope your program succeeds. We need more people who understand what our veterans face coming home. As Price left, Mike remained at the table, considering the implications of their conversation. Price would almost certainly inform Whitaker about the potential complications, which might either accelerate their efforts to secure the property before any historical designation could be formalized, or cause them to reconsider the investment. Entirely, either way, today's assessment with Dr. Chen had become even more crucial. Mike arrived at Rimrock Ranch an hour before the scheduled meeting with Dr. Chen, using the time to walk the perimeter of the suspected facility location. With his training and the information he'd gathered, the signs were increasingly obvious to his experienced eye. Subtle changes in the drainage patterns, vegetation that didn't quite match the surrounding area, and most tellingly, what appeared to be camouflaged ventilation structures disguised as natural rock formations. At precisely 10 o'clock, a university-marked SUV pulled up the rutted driveway, followed by a van with Colorado State University Department of History emblazoned on its side. Dr. Lisa Chen emerged from the SUV, a compact woman in her 50s, with short-cropped salt and pepper hair and the purposeful movements of someone who had spent considerable time in field research. Sergeant Daniels, she called, extending her hand. A pleasure to meet in person. Mike, please, he replied, shaking her hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. She nodded toward the van, where 2 graduate students were unloading. Equipment. I brought ground-penetrating radar and some other detection equipment. The documentation you sent is compelling, but we'll need physical confirmation before making any formal assessments. Over the next 3 hours, Dr. Chen and her team methodically surveyed the ridge area. They used ground-penetrating radar to map subsurface structures, metal detectors to locate buried infrastructure, and infrared cameras to identify temperature differentials that might indicate underground spaces. Mike watched as Dr. Chen's initial professional interest transformed into growing excitement. There's definitely something substantial here, she said, showing him the radar imagery on her tablet. These regular contours aren't natural formations. They're consistent with reinforced concrete construction, approximately 30 feet below the surface. She pointed to another area of the display. And these linear features appear to be access tunnels. The pattern is consistent with other documented presidential facilities from this era, designed to withstand significant blast pressure while maintaining secure access and ventilation. One of her graduate assistants called from several yards away, waving excitedly. "Dr. Chen, I think we found something." They joined the young man who was carefully brushing dirt away from what appeared to be an ordinary rock outcropping. As they watched, he revealed the edge of what was clearly manufactured metal, camouflaged to blend with the surrounding stone. "This is remarkable," Dr. Chen breathed, kneeling to examine the discovery. "Based on the design, this appears to be a disguised emergency ventilation system. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. You wouldn't notice it unless you knew exactly what to look for." She turned to Mike, her expression serious. "Mr. Daniels, I believe you've made a significant historical discovery. This appears to be a Class A presidential emergency facility, likely constructed during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. If we can locate an access point, we could potentially be looking at a pristine Cold War time capsule." Mike nodded, a sense of vindication mixing with the weight of responsibility. "What would be the next steps for historical preservation?" "I can file a preliminary assessment today, which would trigger an expedited review by the State Historical Preservation Office," Dr. Chen explained. "Given the potential national significance, they would likely involve federal agencies as well. The process would place an immediate freeze on any development that might impact the site." "How long would that take?" "The preliminary hold could be in place by tomorrow morning, assuming I submit my assessment this afternoon. The full review would take longer, but would effectively prevent any development that might compromise the historical integrity of the site." Mike nodded. "I'd appreciate if you could proceed with that assessment as quickly as possible." As Dr. Chen and her team continued their survey, Mike's phone rang. It was Sarah Johnson from the bank. "Mike, I thought you should know. Gregory, Phillips just called. Whitaker has increased their offer to $1, $2 million all cash, with closing by Monday. The investment group is strongly considering accepting." Mike glanced at Dr. Chen, who was photographing the uncovered ventilation structure. "When do they need an answer?" "By 5 o'clock today," Sarah replied. "They've scheduled a special meeting with their board. If you want to counter, it would need to be substantial." "Tell them I'll have a response by 4, Mike said. After ending the call, he watched as Dr. Chen's team continued their methodical documentation of the site. Their excitement was palpable. They knew they were potentially uncovering a significant piece of Cold War history, preserved almost exactly as it had been when decommissioned decades earlier. Mike's phone buzzed with a text from Bobby. "Found something big. Call ASAP." Stepping away from the researchers, Mike dialed his nephew. "Uncle Mike, I think I hit the jackpot," Bobby said without preamble. "I was digging through recently declassified files from the Kennedy administration, and I found a memo from Robert McNamara to the president dated October 1962, right in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis." "Go on," Mike said, his pulse quickening. "It references final inspection of Eagle's Nest Alpha, described as a Class A presidential emergency facility with full command and communications capabilities. The location details are still redacted, but the coordinates in the document margin match Rimrock Ranch exactly." "That confirms it," Mike said, watching as Dr. Chen directed her team to scan another section of the hillside. "Anything else?" "This is where it gets really interesting," Bobby continued, excitement evident in his voice. "I found a declassification notice from 1994 referring to the decommissioning of several Cold War facilities. Eagle's Nest was on the list, but unlike the others that were documented and either preserved or dismantled, there's a notation that the facility was secured and sealed pending future disposition, meaning it might be virtually untouched since decommissioning, Mike said, the implications sinking in. Exactly. According to the records, the facility was state-of-the-art in 1962, fully equipped command center, communication systems, living quarters, medical facilities, even a small situation room modeled after the one in the White House. If it was sealed rather than dismantled, it would be a perfectly preserved time capsule from the height of the Cold War, Mike finished. Can you send me those documents immediately? Already on their way to your email, Bobby replied. This is big, Uncle Mike, not just historically significant. We're talking national significance. After ending the call, Mike joined Dr. Chen, who was reviewing the data they'd collected. Dr. Chen, my nephew has uncovered documentation confirming this facility was designated Eagle's Nest Alpha, a presidential command center built during the Cuban Missile Crisis. According to declassified records, it was sealed rather than dismantled when decommissioned in the early 1990s. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. That would be extraordinary. Most of these facilities were either repurposed or systematically emptied. If this one was simply sealed, she shook her head in amazement, we could be looking at one of the most significant Cold War historical sites ever discovered. How quickly can you prepare your assessment? I can submit a preliminary report within 2 hours, she replied. With the documentation you've provided and our survey findings, there's more than enough evidence to trigger an immediate preservation review. Mike nodded, his decision crystallizing. Please proceed as quickly as possible. As Dr. Chen returned to her team, Mike walked to the edge of the ridge, looking out over the valley below. The juxtaposition was stark, the natural beauty of the Colorado landscape that had drawn him to Rimrock Ranch for his veterans program, and beneath it, a hidden relic of one of the most dangerous periods in American history. His phone rang. Again, Gregory Phillips. Mr. Daniels, I wanted to give you a courtesy call. Whitaker Enterprises has increased their offer significantly. The investment committee is meeting at 5 today to make a final decision. I understand, Mike replied. Before they decide, they should know that I've confirmed the historical significance of the property. Dr. Lisa Chen from Colorado State University is currently conducting an assessment that will be submitted to the State Historical Preservation Office this afternoon. A long pause followed. What exactly has she found? Phillips asked, his voice carefully neutral. Evidence of a presidential emergency command facility from the Cuban Missile Crisis, code-named Eagle's Nest Alpha. Documentation indicates it was sealed rather than dismantled when decommissioned, making it potentially one of the most significant Cold War historical sites ever discovered. Another pause. And the implications for development? Once her assessment is filed, there will likely be an immediate freeze on any development that might impact the site, pending a full historical review. Given the national significance, that review would almost certainly result in permanent protection. Mike could practically hear Phillips recalculating. I see, and your offer stands at $875,000. It does, with the understanding that my intended use, a rehabilitation facility for veterans, would preserve and incorporate the historical site, potentially qualifying for preservation grants and historical tourism revenue. I'll convey this information to the committee, Phillips said. They'll want documentation of Dr. Chen's findings before making their decision. She'll have her preliminary assessment completed within 2 hours. I'll forward it to you immediately. After ending the call, Mike rejoined Dr. Chen, who was directing her team to pack up their equipment. We've collected more than enough data to confirm the presence of a significant historical site, she said, her excitement evident. Based on ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging, we're looking at approximately 15,000 square feet of underground facilities, including what appears to be a main bunker complex and multiple access tunnels. She showed him several images on her tablet. What's particularly exciting is that we've located what appears to be a concealed vehicle entrance on the north side of the ridge. The camouflaging is remarkable. It's virtually indistinguishable from the natural rock formation, unless you know exactly what to look for. Can you include all of this in your assessment? Mike asked. Absolutely. I'll prepare it as soon as we return to campus. Given the historical significance, I'll request an expedited review from the State Historical Preservation Office. As Dr. Chen and her team packed up their equipment, Mike checked his email and found the documents Bobby had sent. The declassified memo from Defense Secretary McNamara to President Kennedy was compelling evidence, clearly referencing Eagle's Nest Alpha as a fully equipped presidential emergency facility. Mike forwarded the documents to Dr. Chen, then called Sarah Johnson at the bank. Sarah, I need to increase my offer on Rimrock to $900,000 with the same contingencies as before. That's still significantly below Whitaker's offer, Sarah cautioned. I know, but the historical significance of the property may make their development plans impossible regardless of ownership. I've confirmed the presence of a presidential emergency facility from the Cuban Missile Crisis, potentially of national historical importance. Sarah was silent for a moment. That changes the equation considerably. I'll present your updated offer to Phillips, along with the information about the historical significance. 2 hours later, Mike received Dr. Chen's preliminary assessment. The 20-page report detailed their findings with supporting documentation, satellite imagery, and ground-penetrating radar scans. Her conclusion was unequivocal. Rimrock Ranch contained what appeared to be an intact presidential emergency command facility from the early 1960s, likely of significant historical importance, and warranting immediate protection under historical preservation statutes. Mike forwarded the report to Phillips, along with the declassified documents Bobby had uncovered. Within minutes, his phone rang. Mr. Daniels, this is quite remarkable, Phillips said, his tone now considerably more respectful. Dr. Chen's credentials are impeccable, and her assessment is compelling. I've forwarded everything to the investment committee. And the town council meeting tomorrow? I understand it's been called to fast-track rezoning for Whitaker's development. Given this new information, that might be premature. I agree, Mike said. Dr. Chen's assessment will be filed with the State Historical Preservation Office this afternoon, which will likely trigger an automatic review before any development could proceed. I'll make sure the committee understands the implications, Phillips said. They'll be meeting at 5. As the afternoon progressed, Mike returned to his cabin to prepare for the evening's developments. At 4:45, his phone rang again. It was Darren Price. Mr. Daniels, I wanted to inform you that I've reviewed Dr. Chen's assessment and the declassified documents. I've recommended to Mr. Whitaker that we reconsider our development plans for Rimrock Ranch in light of the potential historical complications. I appreciate your professionalism, Mike replied. As a former Marine, I understand the historical significance of such a facility, Price continued. There are aspects of our shared history that should be preserved, regardless of business considerations. Before Mike could respond, his phone signaled another incoming call, Gregory Phillips. I should take this, Mike said. Thank you for calling, Mr. Price. He switched to the incoming call, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Daniels, I've just concluded the investment committee meeting, Phillips said, his tone both formal and somewhat bemused. In light of the historical significance assessment provided by Dr. Chen and the potential regulatory complications it presents, the committee has decided to accept your offer of $900,000, contingent on standard inspection. Mike felt a surge of satisfaction, carefully keeping his voice even. I appreciate that, Mr. Phillips. I believe it's a decision that will benefit everyone involved. I should inform you that Mr. Whitaker withdrew his offer after reviewing Dr. Chen's assessment, Phillips added. His head of security advised that the historical preservation requirements would make their development plans unfeasible. I understand, Mike said. Please have your attorneys forward the purchase agreement as soon as possible. I'd like to proceed quickly. They'll email it within the hour, Phillips replied. I must say, Mr. Daniels, this has been one of the more unusual property transactions of my career. After ending the call, Mike stood on the small porch of his rental cabin, looking toward the mountains where Rimrock Ranch lay. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley, much as it had the day he'd first visited the property. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Assessment filed with SHPO. They've already responded. Preliminary protection order will be issued tomorrow morning. Congratulations on your remarkable discovery. A moment later, another text arrived. This one from Sam Reynolds. Andrea and I just booked flights. We'll be there next weekend to help you start planning. She's already researching grant opportunities for veteran rehabilitation programs at historical sites. Mike smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The vision he and Jenny had, shared, a place of healing and purpose for veterans transitioning back to civilian life, was one step closer to reality. And in an unexpected twist, the Cold War relic buried beneath the property would become part of that vision, connecting the past to the future. His phone rang again. Sarah Johnson. Congratulations, Mike, she said warmly. The purchase agreement just came through. The committee accepted your offer without modification. Thank you for your help, Sarah. I couldn't have done this without you. I'm just glad it worked out, she replied. Oh, and the mayor called to inform me that tomorrow's town council meeting has been postponed, pending the historical preservation review. Apparently, Mr. Whitaker has withdrawn his rezoning request. After ending the call, Mike opened his laptop and clicked on the folder labeled Rimrock Rehabilitation Center. Inside were the plans he and Jenny had developed over years. Building layouts, program descriptions, therapeutic approaches specifically designed for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. He opened the document titled Phase 1 Implementation and began updating it, incorporating the newly discovered historical facility into their vision. The Presidential Emergency Command Center could serve multiple purposes: a historical preservation site open to the public, generating tourism revenue to support the rehabilitation program, and perhaps most importantly, a tangible connection to history for the veterans who would come to Rimrock to heal. As the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Mike stepped onto the porch of his rental cabin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, finalizing the purchase agreement, coordinating with historical preservation authorities, beginning the detailed planning for the rehabilitation center. But tonight, standing in the fading light of a Colorado evening, Mike felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since before Jenny's diagnosis. The promise they had made to each other, to create something meaningful that would help others who had served, was finally within reach. The hidden presidential bunker beneath Rimrock Ranch had remained sealed for decades, waiting to be rediscovered. In a way, Mike reflected, it wasn't so different from the potential many veterans carried within them. Valuable resources hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right opportunity to be revealed. Tomorrow would bring a new mission, with new challenges and new possibilities. But for tonight, in the quiet of the Colorado dusk, that was enough. The weather shifted dramatically overnight, bringing the first real snowfall of the season. Mike stood at the window of his rental cabin, watching fat flakes swirl against the darkening sky. The approaching storm had accelerated his timeline considerably. There would be no leisurely pace for the initial renovation work at Rimrock Ranch. His phone rang. Darren Price. "Weather reports worse than predicted," the former Marine said, without preamble. "Storm fronts moving faster than expected. If we're going to get that roof secured before it hits, we need to move now." "I'll meet you at the property in 30 minutes, Mike replied, already reaching for his cold weather gear. By the time Mike arrived at Rimrock Ranch, Price had already assembled an impressive team, 8 men unloading materials from several trucks, organizing tools with military precision. Mike recognized the efficient movements of veterans accustomed to operating under pressure. "Sam's flight got diverted because of the weather," Mike told Price as they surveyed the activity. "But he managed to send the structural reinforcement plans we'll need for the main support beams." Price nodded, scanning the darkening sky. "We've got about 4 hours before this system hits full force. Priority is sealing the main house roof and securing the structural integrity of the north wall. The rest can wait." The men worked with remarkable efficiency, their experience evident in the way they anticipated each other's needs and communicated with minimal words. Many had served. Together in various deployments, their bonds forged through shared hardship and mutual trust. As Mike climbed to the roof to help with the emergency weatherproofing, he caught sight of another vehicle approaching, a black SUV with government plates, followed by 2 unmarked vans. The caravan parked near the ridgeline, and several individuals in heavy winter gear emerged, equipment cases in hand. Dr. Chen approached the main house, waving to catch Mike's attention. "Mr. Daniels, the historical assessment team arrived earlier than expected because of the weather forecast. They're setting up now to secure the bunker entrance before the storm." Mike carefully made his way down the ladder. "I thought that wasn't scheduled until next week." "The Smithsonian expedited everything after reviewing our preliminary findings," Dr. Chen explained, excitement clear despite the biting wind. "They've brought specialized equipment to document the facility without compromising its integrity." As if on cue, Mike's phone rang, an unfamiliar Washington, D.C. area code. "Mr. Daniels? This is Richard Hargrove, Special Collections Director with the Smithsonian Institution. I'm calling regarding the Presidential Emergency Facility at your property." Mike listened as Hargrove explained the unprecedented nature of their findings. Based on the ground-penetrating radar and preliminary documentation, Eagle's Nest appeared to be the most intact presidential emergency facility ever discovered from the early Cold War period. The national significance was substantial enough that the Smithsonian had dispatched their team immediately, along with representatives from the National Archives. "We understand you're in the process of establishing a Veterans Rehabilitation Center on the property," Hargrove continued. "We believe there may be an opportunity for a unique partnership that would benefit both your program and our historical preservation efforts." "What kind of partnership?" Mike asked, watching as the government team began setting up equipment. Near the ridge, the Smithsonian could establish a satellite exhibition center showcasing the historical facility operated in conjunction with your rehabilitation program. Veterans participating in your program could receive specialized training in historical preservation and museum operations, creating sustainable employment opportunities while maintaining this significant historical site. The proposal was unexpected but intriguing. "That would align well with our mission," Mike acknowledged. "How would the funding structure work?" "The Smithsonian would secure federal preservation grants to fund the historical component, including restoration and exhibition development. Additionally, we could help structure grant applications for your rehabilitation program, particularly focused on veterans' employment in historical preservation. As Mike ended the call, the snow began falling more heavily. Price approached, his expression serious. "We've got about 2 hours before this turns into a full blizzard. The team can get the emergency roof covering secured, but the structural stabilization will have to wait until weather clears." Mike nodded, making a quick decision. "Focus all resources on weather sealing the main house. We'll deal with everything else after the storm passes." The next few hours passed in a blur of intense activity. The renovation team worked with remarkable efficiency, installing temporary roofing materials designed to withstand extreme winter conditions. Meanwhile, the Smithsonian team established protective coverings over the suspected bunker entrance, securing equipment and setting up monitoring stations to track any potential deterioration during the storm. As darkness fell, the snowfall intensified. Dramatically, Price approached Mike, who was securing the last section of weatherproofing on the main house. "Everyone needs to clear out now," Price said firmly. "Storms intensifying faster than predicted. Roads will be impassable within the hour." Mike surveyed their progress with grim satisfaction. They had managed to secure the essential structures against immediate weather damage, though much work remained once the storm cleared. "Have your team follow me back to town," Mike told Price. "The Eagle Valley Inn has rooms reserved for everyone. We'll regroup once the weather breaks." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen hurried over from the ridge area, snow already accumulating on her parka. "Mr. Daniels, the Smithsonian team has made a significant discovery," she said breathlessly. "They've located what appears to be the main entrance to the facility, concealed beneath what looks like a natural rock formation. Initial scans suggest the interior may be remarkably preserved." Mike glanced toward the ridge, barely visible now through the swirling snow. "We'll have to continue after the storm passes. It's not safe to remain on site any longer." The caravan of vehicles made its way carefully down the access road, headlights creating tunnels of visibility through the increasingly heavy snowfall. Mike led the way, his truck's four-wheel drive struggling for traction on the rapidly deteriorating surface. By the time they reached Eagle Valley, the storm had fully engulfed the region. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to mere feet, transforming the small town into a ghostly landscape of white shrouded buildings and empty streets. The Eagle Valley Inn, a modest establishment that had seen better days, had prepared for their arrival. The owner, Martha Jenkins, greeted them at the entrance. "Got your rooms ready, Mike," she said, handing out keys to the assembled work crew and government personnel. "Dining rooms open all night. Figured you'd all need hot meals after working in this weather." As the team settled in, Mike found himself sharing a table with Price, Dr. Chen, and Richard Hargrove. From the Smithsonian, the dining room's warm atmosphere provided a stark contrast to the howling storm outside. Preliminary ground-penetrating radar suggests the facility is remarkably intact, Hargrove explained, showing images on his tablet. Based on the structural configuration, this appears to be a Class A presidential emergency facility, the highest level of protection designed during the Cold War. "What exactly would that include?" Mike asked. "A full command center, communications facilities, living quarters for the president and key staff, medical facilities, and secure document storage. Essentially, everything needed to maintain government continuity during a nuclear crisis." Dr. Chen added, "The historical significance cannot be overstated. Most of these facilities have been extensively documented and either preserved as museums or repurposed for other government use. Finding one that appears to have been sealed and essentially forgotten is unprecedented." Price studied the images with professional interest. "The concealment is impressive. Military-grade camouflage techniques integrated with the natural terrain features. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure this facility remained undetected. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a latecomer, Carson Whitaker, snow-coating his expensive overcoat as he entered the dining room. "Daniels," he acknowledged, approaching their table, "quite the weather we're having." Mike nodded, surprised to see the developer. "Didn't expect you to brave the storm." "Got caught in it returning from Denver," Whitaker explained. "Figured I'd wait it out here rather than risk the mountain pass to Aspen." He glanced at the assembled group. "Mind if I join you?" An unexpected dinner companion, Whitaker proved surprisingly engaged with the historical discussion. As Hargrove explained the national significance of the bunker discovery, the developer's initial dismissive attitude gave way to genuine interest. So, this facility was actually visited by Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Whitaker asked, examining the declassified documents Hargrove displayed on his tablet. "The evidence suggests he conducted at least one briefing here," Dr. Chen confirmed. "The timing corresponds with his documented visit to Colorado during October 1962, the height of the crisis." "Remarkable," Whitaker murmured. "And it's been sitting there forgotten all these years, right under a property my company nearly developed into condominiums." "Sometimes history hides in plain sight," Mike observed. "You just need to know what you're looking for." The storm continued through the night and into the following day, dropping over 2 feet of snow and effectively isolating Eagle Valley from the outside world. The unexpected confinement created an unusual situation. Mike, his renovation team, the Smithsonian researchers, and Carson Whitaker all stranded together in the small-town inn. By the second evening, with the storm showing signs of weakening, the group had formed an unlikely planning committee. Gathered around tables pushed together in the dining room, they mapped out a comprehensive approach for both the rehabilitation center and the historical preservation of the bunker facility. "The synergy between the projects is actually quite elegant," Hargrove noted, reviewing the integrated plan they had developed. "Veterans participating in your rehabilitation program could receive specialized training in historical preservation and museum operations. The Smithsonian would provide the expertise and certification, creating a unique career pathway." Whitaker, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet throughout much of the discussion, finally spoke up. "I'd like to propose something," he said, drawing everyone's attention. "Whitaker Enterprises has substantial resources and expertise in development, particularly in remote locations with challenging conditions." Mike regarded him skeptically. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "A 3-way partnership," Whitaker replied. "Your Veterans Rehabilitation Center, the Smithsonian's Historical Preservation Project, and Whitaker Enterprises providing development expertise and supplemental funding through our foundation." The room fell silent as Whitaker continued. "Instead of the luxury resort we originally planned, we would develop modest, historically appropriate visitor facilities and infrastructure to support both the rehabilitation center and the historical site. In return, Whitaker Foundation would receive recognition as a founding partner in both endeavors." Mike studied the developer, trying to discern his true motivation. "Why the change of heart, Whitaker?" A slight smile crossed Whitaker's face. "Let's call it an evolution in thinking. Darren made some rather pointed observations about legacy before he resigned. Building yet another luxury resort versus helping preserve a significant historical site and supporting veterans' rehabilitation, which makes for a more meaningful contribution." Indeed, the storm cleared on the 3rd day, revealing a transformed landscape of pristine white, broken only by the winding path snowplows had carved through town. As the roads gradually reopened, the impromptu planning committee prepared to disperse. "We'll have the formal partnership agreement drafted by next week," Hargrove told Mike as the Smithsonian team packed their equipment. "Given the national significance of the discovery, I anticipate expedited approval for the preservation grants." Price and his renovation team were already headed back to Rimrock Ranch, eager to assess any weather damage and resume the critical structural work on the main house. The unexpected snowfall had complicated their timeline, but strengthened their resolve. As Mike prepared to join them, Whitaker approached one final time. "I meant what I said about the partnership, Daniels. Whitaker Foundation is prepared to commit substantial resources to this project, both financial and technical. My team will draft a formal proposal for your review." Mike nodded, still somewhat suspicious of the developer's motives, but willing to consider the potential benefits for his veterans program. "I'll look forward to receiving it." 6 months later, Rimrock Ranch had undergone a remarkable transformation. The main house stood fully renovated, its historical character preserved while incorporating modern amenities necessary for the rehabilitation program. The surrounding outbuildings had been systematically restored, creating workspace, educational facilities, and housing for program participants. Near the ridgeline, carefully integrated with the natural landscape, stood the newly established Eagle's Nest Presidential Facility Museum. The Smithsonian-designed exhibition center provided public access to the historical site while maintaining the integrity of the original bunker complex. Most significantly, the Rimrock Veterans Rehabilitation Center had welcomed its first cohort of participants, 12 veterans transitioning from military service to civilian life through a comprehensive program that combined therapeutic support, practical skills development, and specialized training in historical preservation. Mike stood on the porch of the main house watching as the spring sunlight illuminated the property. Sam and Andrea Reynolds had arrived the previous day to help finalize the program curriculum, bringing their expertise in construction management and occupational therapy to the project. "Hard to believe how much has changed in 6 months," Sam remarked, joining Mike on the porch. "When you first showed me this place, I thought you were crazy." Mike smiled slightly. "Sometimes the most valuable things aren't immediately obvious." Below them, in what had once been an overgrown field, program participants worked alongside historical preservation specialists from the Smithsonian, learning techniques for documenting and preserving Cold War-era artifacts recovered from the bunker. The Presidential Emergency Facility had exceeded all expectations. When finally accessed, it had revealed a perfectly preserved time capsule from one of history's most dangerous periods. Original communications equipment, strategic documents, and even personal items left behind when the facility was decommissioned. The discovery had generated national media attention, drawing historians, government officials, and curious visitors to Eagle Valley. What had once been a struggling ranching community was experiencing an unexpected renaissance as a destination for historical tourism. Most remarkably, the unlikely partnership between Mike's Veterans Program, the Smithsonian, and Whitaker Enterprises had proven surprisingly effective. Where Whitaker had initially planned luxury condominiums, his company had instead developed thoughtfully designed visitor facilities that complemented both the historical site and the rehabilitation center. The Whitaker Foundation's financial support had accelerated program development, while the Smithsonian's expertise ensured that the historical preservation met the highest professional standards. Together, they had created something none could have accomplished alone. As Mike watched the veterans working below, he felt a sense of satisfaction that had eluded him since Jenny's passing. The vision they had shared, creating a place where those who had served could find new purpose, had materialized in ways neither could have imagined. "You were right, Jen," he murmured. watching as one of the program participants carefully documented a Cold War-era communication device under a Smithsonian expert's guidance. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries are hidden in plain sight. A vehicle approached up the driveway, Dr. Chen's university SUV, returning from her latest research expedition to regional archives. She had become a regular presence at Rimrock, dividing her time between academic responsibilities and the ongoing historical documentation of the presidential facility. "Mike," she called, approaching with evident excitement, "we've made another remarkable discovery. The Kennedy Presidential Library has identified additional documents referencing Eagle's Nest, including transcripts of crisis meetings held here. During October 1962, it appears decisions that directly impacted the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis may have been made in this facility." The historical significance of Rimrock Ranch continued to expand with each new discovery, reinforcing the value of preserving this unique site. What had begun as Mike's personal mission to create a veterans rehabilitation center had evolved into something with national importance, a living connection to a pivotal moment in American history. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Mike hosted a small gathering on the main house porch. Sam and Andrea Reynolds, Dr. Chen, Darren Price, who had formerly joined the rehabilitation program as operations director, and several key staff members shared a quiet celebration of their progress. "A toast," Sam proposed, raising his glass, "to unlikely discoveries and second chances. And to Jenny," Andrea added softly, "whose vision made all of this possible." Mike nodded, emotion briefly overwhelming him as he looked out over what they had created together. The rehabilitation center was already making a difference in veterans' lives. The historical site was preserving an important piece of American history. And he had found purpose again after years of feeling adrift following Jenny's passing. "She always said everything happens for a reason," Mike reflected. "I didn't believe her when we lost the original property we wanted for the center, but if we'd gotten that one, we'd never have found this place, or what was hidden beneath it." As darkness fell over Rimrock Ranch, lights illuminated the pathways connecting the main house to the outbuildings and the museum complex beyond. The property that had sat abandoned and neglected for years now hummed with purpose and possibility. From forgotten ranch to presidential historic site, from luxury development to veterans sanctuary, Rimrock had undergone a transformation that mirrored the journey of the veterans it now served. Like them, it had found new purpose, revealing hidden strength and unexpected value that had been there all along, waiting to be discovered by someone who knew how to look beneath the surface. In the quiet of the evening, with the mountains silhouetted against the starry sky, Mike finally felt the sense of peace that had eluded him since losing Jenny. The dream they had shared had materialized in ways neither could have imagined, creating ripples that would impact countless lives for generations to come. Sometimes, Mike reflected, the most significant discoveries aren't found in dramatic moments of revelation, but in the quiet persistence of those who refuse to accept the obvious. Assessment of what others have dismissed as worthless. Whether in abandoned properties or struggling veterans, the potential for transformation often lies just beneath the surface, waiting for someone with the vision to see it and the commitment to bring it forth. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.